Hey, what's going on, folks? We have a great show for you today. So, Mark Zuckerberg went on the Joe Rogan podcast to say this.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
We have that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter.
So the FBI came to him and told him to be on the lookout for Russian interference. The New York Post has reported, like many others, that that wasn't true. Interesting.
What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So we're going to talk about this story today.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But basically a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper-political issue, so depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But
right.
And also I have the star of the new documentary Uncle Tom 2, Chad Jackson, coming on to talk about this and some controversial takes on Martin Luther King, integration, and the untold story of the early black conservative that was subverted by some left-wing ideological socialists.
But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's like very professional law enforcement, if they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
It's going to be a great show, folks. Stay tuned.
It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles. It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles. Yeah.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Dream Rare Podcast. I have a special guest today, the star of the new documentary Uncle Tom 2, Chad Jackson. Thanks for joining, Chad.
Thank you for having me, Anomaly. It's good to be on here.
I'm excited to talk about a little bit of the documentary and just the premise of it, because I went to the premiere in Anaheim, I believe, and I already saw it. But first, I wanted to talk about the breaking story about Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan, because he admitted what a lot of us knew. Well, I guess a lot of people didn't know about the FBI part, but the Hunter Biden laptop story, they wrote it off as Russian disinformation for most of the election. Twitter completely covered it up. He admitted that they cut the reach of it. And then afterwards, a couple months or perhaps a year after the election, they admitted that it wasn't Russian disinformation. It was legitimate. And, everybody wonders whether that influenced the election, because obviously it did to an extent. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. The thing that stuck out to me the most about what you just played was when he said that fewer people saw it than would have saw it. And so, you hear a lot of conservatives and a lot of free speech advocates talking about this thing called shadow banning. And I believe that Mark Zuckerberg and as well as Jack Dorsey and others have said in the past that shadow banning doesn't exist, and that confused or like a deer in headlights whenever that word's brought up. But for him to say like, yeah, fewer people saw it than would have saw it because of things that we've done, that's basically shadow banning in a nutshell. So the question becomes like, why is it that they don't want people to see this information? They definitely have a horse that they're backing in terms of elections and just the way that the world is moving, for sure.
You know, they can't just come out and say, like a authoritarian country, we're, deleting opponents of our political ideology. That wouldn't go over well. They can't say that we're rigging, corporate America against people we disagree with ideologically. So they have to say, you are a threat to public health. You are possibly Russian. These are the excuses they've used over the years, but their censorship goes one way politically and not the other. And it actually goes both ways when it comes to whoever's challenging the establishment, because I learned this the hard way following the Bernie versus Hillary thing, right? Because I just, in my soul, I felt like Hillary wasn't a good candidate, and I felt like Bernie was a better option. I mean, in hindsight, they're both phony, but I watched them call every Bernie supporter Russian. It's really narcissistic, because instead of being like, okay, these people disagree with me for this reason and we got to figure out how to get them on our side or just ignore them, it's like, no, I can't fathom that there's millions of Americans who like Trump and millions of Americans who like Biden and think about the country differently than me. I have to say that they're Russian, which is psychotic, because it's okay to just be like, hey, these Democrats totally disagree with me. I understand why. I think I have an idea why I believe they're misled, but I know that that's how they think. It's not like the Russians like planted this chip in their head or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think when it comes to the FBI in particular, I'm actually grateful that Mark came out and said what he said, because the thing that there are still conservatives who believe that the FBI is good and they're on our side because of what they did with the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump election back in 2016, whenever they admitted that they were investigating her. And Hillary believed that is what caused her to lose the election, because that news came out so close to election day. But don't let that be the thing that makes you think that the FBI is somehow conservative. I mean, really, the FBI is supposed to be a neutral bureaucracy, but it's absolutely not. I mean, they are definitely going on these witch hunts against people who they don't want to be influential in this country.
Right, and it's getting really creepy. Back in the day, I mean, obviously things were probably bad to a certain extent even then, but there was once a point where people understood you were allowed to question big pharma. I used to watch 60 Minutes reports where they used to talk about injuries from big pharma products, and that was normal. It didn't mean everybody got it, but we knew it existed to a small extent, and it was newsworthy. Now it's not newsworthy because they're trying to cover it up. And it's the same thing with this type of stuff. I'd be fine. It's like if you're just going after human traffickers and drug dealers coming across the border and just really evil stuff out there, I would like to think that some of that's going on. But on a big scale, it definitely looks like politically they've gotten to the point where they think their shit doesn't stink. Well, I'm an expert, so you can't disagree with my vaccine takes. And I'm doing the data and the research myself, and it's like, just because Pfizer and Moderna says it doesn't mean it's true. And now I'm actually going to cover this later today. Moderna is actually suing Pfizer. I don't know if you saw that this morning.
Yeah,
Moderna is suing Pfizer because they believe that their technology was copied. So now that the pharma cartels are going at each other, maybe we'll get some truth out of them, because it's the hubris of these people in charge to not only say, hey, I don't like these people because they're conservative and I disagree with their ideology, but then to go as far as to say, I'm just going to write everything off as Russian. That goes against our political agenda. So then we have the justification to censor it as a foreign agent. But then when push comes to shove a year later and we find out it has nothing to do with that, or it wasn't misinformation, that it's too late, because they already got the result they wanted, which was quashing millions of accounts who were sharing the information to alter the course of an election.
And there's also like an issue at the very beginning of this thing. The fact that the FBI, which is a government agency, saw it fit to go to a private company and tell them like, hey, this information is about to come out, you should suppress it. Like, they're literally violating the First Amendment of the Constitution. You know what I mean? Because people use Facebook and the Meta, software to express their opinions on various matters and various topics. So for a government agency to come to a company and say, hey, make it to where those people's opinions don't get to, go out as far as it otherwise would, Like that's a violation of the Constitution. And so
Right.
who's checking the FBI? You know what I mean?
Right. And he said that they just gave them kind of the narrative and then he censored that story. Like they told us kind of what to look for and then we look
Right.
for that. And this is something that goes really unspoken about because I think in the right wing sphere, Trump really controls the narrative and a lot of people just say what he says. And in some cases, like when they talk about the election, that's fine. But one of the things that no one talks about because it's not really being fully explained is, and I guess shadow banning, everybody knows it's existing, but exactly how like crazy of social engineering it is. Say I look at you, the Hodge twins, Candace Owens, DC Drano. I'm just going to name 50 influencers in my head, the top conservative leaning influencers, right? And I say, hey, what if we cut back their reach 50%? What if we cut it back 20%, 30% in our algorithms? How many people do they reach in a week? Say total, that's hundreds of millions of people reached. Well, if we cut that back 60%, now they're only going to reach a couple tens of millions of people. And do that for 3 months. Every time an election comes around, the last 2 times, all of a sudden my reach gets cut and I get these BS warnings for reports that are accurate. And they tell me, sorry, we're cutting your reach. This has already happened to me multiple times. I know exactly what they're doing, whether they admit it or not. And nobody explains it how I'm explaining it now, but they're social engineering the public by not completely eliminating people, but cutting such a large portion of their reach. And they have all your data, all their information. If you usually eat cheesesteaks on a Wednesday, they probably know because they've accumulated data on you that knows you better than most people know themselves. So they're doing this and they're rigging elections that way by social engineering it. And this Hunter Biden story is just the obvious example. And like you said, thank you, Mark Zuckerberg, for admitting that because that takes some balls to tell the truth about how the FBI came to you and, you know, basically suggested that there was stuff coming.
Do you think he was just being like really candid on accident, or do you think that there was some kind of ulterior purpose in admitting that?
Could be two things. I mean, one, it's tough to do a 3-hour interview. I give Zuckerberg credit. As robotic as he is, I do find him, you know, he does seem like he wants to reach out to the public and do these long form interviews. So most people that don't do this every day have a hard time. You know, sometimes the truth comes out and you don't even think, because if you talk for 2 hours with Joe Rogan and Joe's such a chill guy, you know, it brings the chillness out of you. So he might have done it by mistake. He might have just been honest about it, or maybe it's his way. Because say we ran Facebook, right? I'm Mark Zuckerberg, and you know the FBI comes to you. Like, what do? You don't want to disagree. It's scary to disagree with the FBI. They come to your technology company and say, hey, there's going to be Russian disinformation, and you know they already, for as bad of a rap as Zuckerberg gets, because he deserves it in some ways. You know, why does the media hate on him so much? Why are there so many documentaries about him but not Google, when Google and YouTube is worse? I'm not saying Zuckerberg's your friend, but I'm saying when it comes to the lesser two evils, they blame him for the 2016 election because Bernie supporters and Trump supporters really rose up on Facebook and got the information out there. So they're trying to quash him the hardest because they know Facebook is such a massive tool, and they know that it was, whether they admit it or not, it was individual people, mothers and random Americans who got Trump elected, not Russians. Right. So I think Zuckerberg in some ways is probably nervous after being blamed for the 2016 elections. If the FBI comes to your door in 2020, maybe it's him trying to tell the public like, yo, I'm not really running the show.
No, I think you're onto something. And I don't know if you remember, but in the 2008 election, Obama's campaign leaned heavily on social media, and of course then it wasn't as censored as it is now. And of course he was pushing a message that the Zuckerberg team, I think, would agree with, and so they had a vested interest in not suppressing any of that. But yeah, it's crazy because we put the original Uncle Tom film on YouTube for free in anticipation for Uncle 2 coming out, and it was getting like 10,000 views per day, which is unheard of because our YouTube page for 2 years was just completely asleep. We haven't posted anything to it. So for us to just drop that movie and for it to get as many views in such a short amount of time was kind of crazy. And then YouTube all of a sudden decided to put an age restriction on it. And so you have to bypass 2 warnings before you can even watch the film, and it's not even shareable on YouTube anymore. And so subsequently we put the trailer and the teasers for part 2 on our YouTube page, and they got like no more than 15,000 views. And this subject matter is very hot, and so it's just crazy how it's crazy how what links they're willing to go to like suppress this messaging and what we're trying to do. So I mean, this this Zuckerberg thing has a lot of implications, and it basically verifies what a lot of us already knew all along.
I know they're cutting my reach on Facebook, and I always, because I'm, very familiar with social media, and sometimes people just don't keep up with the times, and then they play the victim. And I try not to be the boy who cried wolf, because then when, we're really getting censored, like you're talking about, it doesn't make as much sense to people. Where I'm on Facebook, I'm like, is it because they're going to these little Instagram Reels sort of things? Is that why I'm losing traction? But I had 10,000 people in a live stream about mandates. They cut my live for a week. I come back and I can only get 1,000 to 1,500 now. And I'm like, I'm willing to say I just become more terrible or my show gets worse. I'm able to look at myself and be like, yeah, there's something going on. But I'm like, I know I was getting 5 times as many. And when he talks about what he did to Hunter's laptop, I know he's doing it to my page because I have 1.6 million views. I got almost 1 billion views on Facebook. I've rivaled, mainstream media. And now I know that's exactly what he's doing, where people say, dude, I haven't seen your posts in 4 months, 5 months. And it's like, they're doing what they did to the Hunter laptop story to me, which is cut my reach by, 20 to 80% or something. And then I still get out there, but instead of, 3 million views and making a huge social impact, it only can get tens of thousands. So, and same with YouTube. Crazy. YouTube's really, really bad with, if they see something, and this is, I know we have Rumble, we have Truth and etc. But, this is an interesting, and, even with Andrew Tate, I don't really want to go into it too much, but he got so big where he was everywhere and then they ripped him out of everywhere. So regardless of what you think of the guy, if you can crack the matrix, it's crazy the lengths they go now to just try to rip you out of it.
I noticed that, like, YouTubers who do have a significant following over 1 million, the more followers they get, the more kind of restricted they get, voluntarily restricted they are in terms of what they talk about, what they will and won't say. And I know that's, they're kind of dancing with the algorithm, so to speak. But like, what is your take on that? Are they being kind of coached by the liaison that they have from YouTube, or like, why do they feel so afraid to say the wrong thing?
Right. There's two things. I think some people are just sellouts, and they don't want to talk about real things. But as somebody that kind of sees how it works, I think it reminds me of the game Minesweeper. I always say this. If you remember, nobody knows when I say this. Do you know the game Minesweeper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Thank you, bro. Because I've done this with 3 people, and they're like, "What's Minesweeper?" I'm like, "Am I that old?" It's the game where you click and try not to hit a mine. Yeah. Where you could see there's certain stories. Like if you just say like flat out, without explaining it, without evidence, if you just say like the election was stolen, that'll get it deleted off YouTube. And it's like there's certain buzzwords. So I get the point of people trying to dance around certain phrases in order to get their message out there, because at the end of the day, on Facebook or Instagram, we clearly are not free. These are not platforms where they respect the First Amendment. That's evident. So, you either got to pull like an Alex Jones or Owen Benjamin and just create your whole own other platform, or kind of play the game. But, there's people that I think are just not, they're not authentic. But I do get the point of like, if you have this big page and you're reaching hundreds of thousands of people, can you phrase what you're saying in a better way? Like for me, it's made me even crazier, more accurate. I was always pretty accurate, but now I'm showing sources 100 times. I'm holding it up to the camera being like, because I've gotten messages from fact checkers where they're stalking my Instagram, they're reading my comments, they're blaming me for the comments that other people are reading. They're coming to my Facebook to rate an Instagram video false, even though the Instagram video is not on Facebook. These people are psychos. So I kind of see it as a chess match personally. So it really depends. I think you have great intuition, so you could tell the difference between someone who's being a fraud versus like just trying to be safe.
Yeah, it just seems to me like kind of on a different subject, but kind of the same. Like to the extent that conservatives or just people who believe in free speech have like large platforms, whether it be, well, I'm not going to name names, but like why can't we just be cooler? You know what I mean? Why can't we just make our product sexier in such a way that people actually want to come to it, or user friendly? But that's neither here nor there.
I think, Rumble is chasing YouTube, and it's a good alternative. I think Truth Social is chasing Twitter and it's a good alternative. But overall, I think the real win would be creating TikTok instead of China. China won because they created the new thing, or they rather really just restructured Vine, because Twitter bought Vine and deleted Vine, which was the stupidest move in modern history, because Vine was TikTok before TikTok. So it's like conservatives are always like kind of chasing the tail. I think if they ever can create the new thing, that's when you're going to have a lot of power. But it's really crazy how the system comes down on you. Like Andrew Tate is getting the same treatment as Alex Jones and Owen Benjamin. Like, Owen has spoken before and said like his wife can't even go on Airbnb. Andrew Tate is this guy who's like macho and he's like, yo, I run the world. But I'm paraphrasing, but it's like he looked really humbled. And I don't say this is good. I think it's terrible, but they took away like his PayPal, this, overnight. It's like you're living in a sci-fi horror movie. All your stuff shuts off. And if you use Venmo and PayPal to pay your friends, you can't do that. You can't pay your bills anymore. Like, it's like the whole matrix of the computer structure literally shuts you off. Like you're not human. And it's like, that is the price to pay that some people have to pay. But, Gab did a good job of weathering that storm. And so did a few other creators.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
I want to talk about this. I'm excited to talk about this because we chatted just off camera, before the premiere. I watched the movie. Uncle Tom 2 is out, guys. If you haven't seen the first one, it's online for free. The second one is coming out, or it is out today. Today's the premiere, so thanks for your time. But it really goes through the story of the black conservative throughout history, and it's really great. It shows how there was like like you always hear, you don't hear slavery, integration, and in between it's like, well, what was going on? And there's a story to be told about, what was happening that isn't told. So I think no one's better to tell it than you. So give people an intro.
Yeah, for sure. So, Uncle Tom, the original documentary, came out in 2020. It was basically conservatism 101, or Black conservatism 101. After that was released, there were people who were requesting a sequel and were asking that we go deeper. And so we did just that. Uncle Tom 2 is a film that Justin Malone, who's a director, writer, Ansel, who's one of the producers and sound designers, and myself, under the behest of Larry Elder and another executive producer, we basically teamed up and we worked hard on this film. Lots of research, lots of just interviewing and laboring over this thing. By the time we were, done, the thing was like 5 hours long, but we had to, condense it down to what is being released today. And so we're very pleased with it. It's a story that I think all Americans need to hear, regardless of what your color is. Whenever people think of Uncle Tom, because they watch the original film, they think of Black conservatives. But this film is really an American story, not just a Black story. So
right. Yeah. It's really good. I watched it. It's 2 hours. There's a lot of information, and I woke up and I'm going to play a clip from it in like 20 seconds. I woke up the next day and I felt really inspired because, I'm somebody who reads a lot. I like to learn, and there's a lot of really great nuggets in there that really stuck with me over the course of days and weeks afterwards. So I recommend it. We'll tell you where to get it, but here's a clip of, a man talking about before integration, because we've talked about this on the show too. I'm not saying that people coming together is not great. Obviously that is good, and that was happening naturally anyway. But the way the government did it, as you could see, certain neighborhoods are an absolute mess. A lot of people are stuck on welfare. Something happened, and there was a different story to be told. So this guy kind of goes through how before integration, Black people owned a lot of stuff, their own businesses, and integration didn't just, mix Black people into white infrastructure, but it actually eliminated Black infrastructure, which is, something I learned last year, 2 years ago. So let's play this clip and then we'll talk about it with Chad.
Black folk had up 100 times more before social integration hit. I'm old enough to tell you all that. You all not old enough to know that yet. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, see, we had something. We weren't looking for any social integration. You know why? Because we had our own businesses there. We had our own cab companies, we had our own restaurants, we had our own hotels, we had our own school systems. My family was part of one that had the only Black bus line in the entire United States. All of our mechanics was Blacks, all of our drivers were Blacks, electricians was Black, everything was Black. We don't kill our buses.
Right.
social integration. When all of a sudden, you all start talking about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King going down to Alabama, want to integrate the bus lines. Integrate whose bus line?
I have always ridden in the back of the bus because I didn't have guts to get in the front of the bus. But now the time had come. I was riding in the front of the bus.
Like Winston Salem says, we want to ride on fronts of white buses. So we said, we don't have any white buses. They said, well, get some so we can ride on the front of them.
I feel like a complete asshole because I never thought about that. Like that whole time they did the boycott, they should have been trying to establish their own bus company as opposed to wanting to ride. I never thought about that. Y'all boycotted for a year just to want to ride on the front?
See, you're a smart man.
I never thought about that.
but you got it now, right?
In 1905, black people were literally buying entire buildings. This idea that blacks were always at the mercy of whites is just asinine, at least when it came to Booker T. Washington and the effect that he had on those who put his ideas into practice.
Yeah, so let people know what's going on in that clip, because that guy, you know, that would shock a lot of especially liberals today, but even conservatives, where he was like, things were not what they said it was before integration.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I actually found a lot of examples of that clip that you just played whenever we were editing the movie. I think that this notion that black people have always been at the mercy of whites and that we couldn't really mobilize upward without, you know, white people passing laws in order for us to do that is just completely not true. I think one of the things that kind of got me into the headspace of you know, going that direction was whenever I listened to the recording from Manning Johnson, and he's talking about how blacks and whites in the South in that space of time at the turn of the 20th century were actually getting along in the South. And that, of course, challenged this notion that I learned in school growing up, which is no, blacks and whites were always, or whites were always oppressing blacks. Blacks were always afraid. They were always scared and all these different things. And so as soon as I began to, you know, follow that or go down that rabbit hole of just researching what was relations like between blacks and whites in this era, what I found is exactly what Manning Johnson said. And not only that, but when you look at the fact that you did have black communities where you have black schools, black businesses, black everything, the same was true in the Jewish community. The same was true in the Italian community. All these different pockets of communities that existed in this country. So it wasn't unique to blackness. One of the points that Manning Johnson made in his recording is that whenever you work so hard to push for integration in the political sphere, what you're doing at the same time is you're de-incentivizing that dignity for the individual to be an individual, to be a man, to take responsibility for his own life. Because in his mind, he's longing for the day where he will be accommodated by the government, and you're kind of moving closer and closer to a kind of socialist system. And so for Dr. Claude Anderson, who's in that clip, to say like whenever, you know, before the civil rights movement, we actually had it going on as black folks. That I think it challenges this narrative that's being taught in our public schools as we speak.
I want to show you guys. You guys know I very rarely, if pretty much never, do this. You know, I don't promote stuff that I don't like. I like Chad. I like Justin, the director. I love the movie. That's why I'm doing this. UncleTom.com. The code DREAM, you get 30% off of. You can get a DVD or the film. Like, you guys see my things. I don't know the last time I even did a code. I watched the film. I went to the premiere. There's so much information in there, and what he's talking about, I learned through, I think I have it over here, I won't grab it, but it's Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson, which is the book that I read because I saw the G. Edward Griffin video of him in like 1969, and the reason I wanted to read the book, actually I'll just grab it since it's right here, and this actually isn't a promo code, it's just actually a book. I've showed this many times, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. And I saw G. Edward Griffin in black and white, 1969, right? And he's describing basically the BLM riots and what's going on in real time. So I became fascinated. I'm like, how the heck did this guy, G. Edward Griffin, pretty much predict what we're dealing with now in 1969? And he kept talking about this book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. So I read it, and Manning Johnson is a black Christian who ended up kind of getting deceived by the Communist Party. He joined the Communist Party. He was a full-blown communist as a black man in America. And then he left the Communist Party because he realized that they were actually deceiving the American people. They were deceiving Black Americans, and they were pretty much screwing over our sovereignty. And I read this book, and I'm like, wow, it's an easy read, super smart. He's super well written. I want to say really one of the smartest people I've ever read. And as a Black man in America in the 1900s, he's talking about integration as a bad thing. And I'd never heard that. And especially if it comes from someone that's not white, you're like, okay, no offense, that's not like I'm racist against white people, but you get what I'm saying. It's like, oh, I'm white and I'm against integration. It doesn't hit as hard as I'm Black and I'm against integration. I'm like, wait, what? You know, because he lived back then. So then you're starting to realize why. And his thing is exactly what you were saying is, they had Black infrastructures, Black businesses, Black schools. And when they did integration, they took away the Black busing, the Black schools. And now there's hundreds of Black teachers that are unemployed. And that really screwed over the Black community, not just on the other side. And real quick before I pass it back, you know, diversity is a beautiful thing when you have Thai food, when you go to the South and, you know, you try all this different stuff. But what you're seeing they're doing in this world is basically like, oh, we're going to diversify France. Well, it's not France anymore. We're going to diversify Germany. Well, it's not Germany. What is everything, though? It's like this LGBT, rainbow flag, left wing, lock you in their house, wear a mask. This is what they're replacing all of our cultures with. So it's this false idea of integration where the real integration was already happening. The real integration will happen because people will gravitate towards other good people and start to learn and come together. But the false sort of diversity that they're pushing is really just communism on a global scale to get everybody together, steal all their stuff, mix Black and white, but at the same time take away Black and white infrastructure. Now it's thrown together. People are not feeling comfortable about it because it didn't happen organically. And now both sides look back and they don't own anything anymore. So it was really a bigger deception than most understands.
No, 100%. You know, to quote Malcolm X, and you know, not to say that Malcolm X is a saint, but you know, at least unlike Martin Luther King, whose speeches were written for him, and he was a good orator, a lot of Malcolm X's ideas were his own. Even though he was always quoting Elijah Muhammad, much of what he was saying was a lot of his own beliefs. And what he said was what they were trying to do with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was force or put a gun to white people's heads and force them to accept Black people. And he said that that's hypocrisy. He'd much rather a white man voluntarily embrace him with open arms than to be forced by law to love him. And if you fast forward to just a few years ago, Denzel Washington was doing an interview on the red carpet, and you know, whenever Trump was elected to office, and the white interviewer asked him about racism, and he goes, "You can't legislate love." You know, Denzel said, "You can't force somebody with the law to love you." And so, what the civil rights movement did was it played on this kind of emotionalism and sensationalism, and people avoided the fact that that piece of legislation was not really constitutional because it had two titles in it that would expand the role of government and in a sense suppress the rights of private business owners. That's what that law did, but nobody was paying attention to that. To the extent that you did have people paying attention to it, like Barry Goldwater, they were called racists and bigots and so on and so forth. But if you really go back and listen to what Barry Goldwater was saying, he was right all along. You know, I mean, how is it that you have Barry Goldwater and Malcolm X, who are supposed to be on two complete ends of the political spectrum, saying the same exact thing? Right. And you also had the governor of Georgia at the time saying the exact same thing, and he was also called a racist. And so this is a true communist tactic. You target the individual who is speaking truth and are saying the things that will wake people up, and you basically lambast that person and try to bury them with all these pejoratives so as to not allow that person to have any kind of influence over society.
Right. And chapter 2 of Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson, he said this was back in the 1900s. He said they were subverting Black churches. This is what G. Edward Griffin read when I was like, I got to read this book. This is, keep in mind, this could be today, but this was 100 years ago. They said they were creating doubt, lack of confidence, suspicion, setting up situations to bring racial bitterness, violence, and conflicts, putting forth demands that were so unrealistic that race relations were worsened, and they attacked everybody that was in disagreement as a reactionary, a fascist, a Ku Kluxer if you were white, and an Uncle Tom if you were black. So they were doing the same tactic. If you disagree with communism, you're an Uncle Tom. If you disagree with Uncle Communism, you're a fascist. You're a KKK member. And fast forward 100 years, I mean, that could have been written by me yesterday, and it still makes sense.
But the sinister thing about it is that they weren't calling it communism. They're calling it different things. Progressivism. They're calling it, integration, desegregation. So they would call it all these different things so as to make it seem harmless in the eyes of the general public. They called Martin Luther King the moral leader of our day. And the interesting thing about Martin Luther King is this man grew up in Ebenezer Baptist Church, where his father was the pastor there. So he had a front row seat to his dad basically delivering these sermons and doing so with such skilled oratory, flawlessness.
Right.
So he had a front row seat to that. And so he obviously learned what it took to be an effective speaker. He didn't actually want to go to seminary initially because he really didn't believe in Jesus. He says in his papers that he wrote that anybody can read right now. They're at Stanford, and I think they're even published, that you can go buy them right now. Probably at Barnes & Noble even, where he's talked about him having rejected Christ by age 12. He was actually encouraged to go to seminary because there were people who believed that he could be effective. There's correspondence between his professors at Crozer and I forget the other seminary, where they said that this is the Negro minister who can take our beliefs, which was socialism, to the Negro South. I mean, all this stuff is written. And so a lot of people believe that Martin Luther King didn't become, I guess, a radical progressive until the latter years of his life. But if you go back and read his papers, you'll see that he believed this stuff all along. He had Stanley Levison, who was a Jewish communist treasurer. He had him in his inner circle. He had Bayard Rustin, who was also a communist in his inner circle. He was warned that these people were communists, and rather than excommunicating them, he kept them on his payroll. He kept them in his inner circle. So this stuff gets kind of deep. It's a lot of it people don't want to believe, because it goes against, once again, everything we've learned all along. But Manning Johnson was absolutely right. There's another woman, Julia Brown, who talks about how the civil rights movement was used as a ploy to inject communism into the Black South and to America at large. So this stuff is all well documented.
So now, because I watched once again, guys, the 30% off, it's a real code. I don't do this ever. I watched the documentary. It goes through, perhaps the best information I've ever seen personally about challenging the Martin Luther King narrative is in Uncle Tom too. So check it out there and use the code DREAM. But what do you think about the civil rights movement and act, where obviously it's been taught to us as one of the greatest things? It defeated racism, but at the same time, racism's exactly the same in the left wing. We beat racism, but it's still here, and give us your money because it's worse than ever, but it's better. Conflicting narratives you get. But yeah, and what happened after the Civil Rights Act, and what type of things in that did you like or dislike?
No, for sure. So people sleep on the fact that a lot of these so-called Jim Crow laws were already falling off the books well before Martin Luther King came onto the scene. You have to kind of understand these backdrops in order to make a lot of this stuff make sense. These laws were already falling off the books because business owners in the South, many of them believe that these laws were just not feasible. They didn't make sense. And not only that, but you did have these, to the extent that you didn't have communist agitation alive and well, you did have blacks and whites getting along very well with each other. Many business owners were defying the state Jim Crow laws that were on the books because, again, they didn't think that these laws were feasible. So they were already going away. To the extent that you did have so-called racial friction, many of this was being reported on by progressive white journalists on the one hand, and the NAACP, which is also a socialist organization, on the other hand. So they wanted to, I mean, Manning Johnson says himself, they went out of their way to create race issues. They wanted there to be chaos because, you know, this evil can thrive when there's chaos, when there's division. So that's what they wanted. And so to answer your question about what you asked, when you look at the state of Black America, particularly in the South, prior to the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, the thing that really guided how Black people moved in this country was their faith. Many of them went to church and they learned the authentic gospel, which encouraged them, you know, their men to be men, their women to be women, encouraged them to be productive, you know, in spite of their circumstances, so on and so forth. That goes back to Booker T. Washington, who taught the message of, you know, casting down your bucket where you are, be productive, stop complaining, be a man. When the civil rights movement comes along, you have such oratory masters as Martin Luther King, who's basically instilling the spirit of bitterness in the minds of Black folks, even though people didn't realize it at the time because he's such a charming, charismatic speaker. And so what he's saying is, you know, there's two Americas. White people live in abundance and Black people live in hopeless despair. And, you know, we need to do something about this and we need to pass laws. And what that did was that kind of de-incentivized this productivity that you saw in the Black South. There's a, you know, when you look at the figures of the number of men who well, basically Black people more and more kind of leaving, you know, the trades and agriculture and just all these different shifts that took place around about that time and going into the 70s and 80s. You saw this rapid incline of Black productivity in America from the end of slavery to about the 1960s, and then you see a decline after the fact. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the rhetoric began to change around about that time.
And what about the exact legislation? Like Martin Luther King comes here, we learn, oh my God, it's so great, you know, change is going to come. And, you know, and then you look at some places like, say, like Little Rock, you know, that's one of the places you learn, Little Rock. And I think to myself, just logically, it's like, okay, is that a nice area now? I'm pretty sure that's like very crime-rated area. You know, it's not like a peace, love, and people, white and Black people dancing. You know, like, I mean, I'm sure there are white and Black people literally dancing in Little Rock, but it's not you know, it's not as great now as you would think. So what did the Civil Rights Act actually do? What happened with the legislation? Or do you think it was all rhetoric and like social engineering?
It was all of it, really. I think so. If without the popularization of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, I believe 100% that Little Rock would be in a better state today than it is. Than it actually is. I firmly believe that. Same is true of, you know, some of these towns in Alabama and Louisiana, so on and so forth. What the Civil Rights Movement did was it moved Black culture from a trying race to a crying race. In other words, a race of people that is about their business and about handling their business to a race of people who is always complaining about racism, always complaining about, you know, what is not being done for us. I mean, even like today, to the extent that you have Democrats who, Black people by and large vote for Democrats. And if you try to, if a Black conservative tries to tell that Black Democrat, like, you should vote for Republicans because Democrats haven't done anything for you. It's like, okay, great. Like, you're trying to get them to vote conservative, but like your messaging is flawed too, because like, why do you need a party or a politician to do anything for you? So it kind of speaks to this kind of brainwashing that has gone on, where we firmly believe that regardless of whether you vote for a Republican or a Democrat, you believe somebody's supposed to do something for you. The spirit of somebody doing something for you, again, is what we got as a result of the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act wasn't enough. You had a lot of legislation that was passed after the fact, and they're still trying to push what now it's called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So so what it's become is this thing where a lot of Black people are constantly having their hands out, waiting for the next legislation to be passed, because maybe this time it will fix things and move it in a direction of racial harmony. And people still haven't gotten through their heads that there's no amount of legislation that will fix what is broken. It's on you as an individual to do that. So
Right.
It just really set a bad precedence, I guess you could say.
Right, guys, once again, I moved the code down here, uncletom.com, code DREAM, DREAM, and you could get 30% off. You could either stream it from your computer or get a DVD or both. Before you leave, if you have time, I really would love to go over. Do you have time? Like 10 more minutes?
Yeah, I got time. Yeah.
All right. All right. I'm a filibuster now. I'm going to keep you for 2 hours. No, but I wanted to talk about because before the documentary, I started learning about this, and you guys just nailed it and really covered it. I'm so glad, which is like the ideological battle between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And before I let you just go off, I'm sure you're going to crush it. I read Booker T. Washington in college. It was one of the few things that stuck with me because I don't remember a lot of stuff from college. No offense, teachers, but it was boring. I don't like geology. Rocks. I don't care about rocks. But, reading Booker T. Washington, I was like, man, that really, before I knew why, it changed my whole reality, because you're learning your whole life that before Martin Luther King, everything was so bad and racist and people didn't have education, there was slavery. And I'm reading Booker T. Washington, and like Manning Johnson, I'm thinking to myself, this guy is smarter than anyone I've ever read in the present day of any race. And, the things he was talking about were inspiring, uplifting. He seemed happy. He seemed confident. And I'm like, how in the world is this the 18 and 1900s? And how is he so happy? So explain that, if you can, who Booker T. Washington was and how it was like the right versus left between him and the socialist/communist W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah, for sure. So Booker T. Washington was born in the South. He was born into slavery. And slavery ended when he was still, a boy. He went to Hampton University, where he met this guy, General Armstrong, who basically taught him a lot of this stuff about productivity and education and all these different things. Tuskegee, which is a school in Alabama, needed a professor or needed, a headmaster. And so they sent Booker T. Washington down to Alabama, and he made it this big school that took a lot of these former slaves in and taught them productivity, taught them what it meant to be a man, taught them to be about their business, really. And there was just something about Booker T. Washington that wherever he went, like, he just kind of demanded respect. He was just that kind of guy. Comparatively, W.E.B. Du Bois was born in the North. He was born into not only a free family, but a very wealthy family. He ended up going to Harvard. At the time, they were very antithetical to capitalism at Harvard, and so he got the full breadth of that. By the time he graduated from Harvard, I think he got a degree in sociology or something like that. He got to work to try to, in a sense, set himself up as a leader to influence the masses of Black folks to kind of go the way of socialism. A lot of his influence was very inorganic. So what the NAACP resolved to do is to try to wrestle away leadership, not only from Booker T. Washington, but from Southern pastors who had this natural influence. We show in the film Uncle Tom 2, W.E.B. Du Bois yucking it up with Chairman Mao. This man was a full-blown communist. And when you look at like Black intellectualism today, it's interesting that W.E.B. Du Bois is posted up as like the leader of Black intellectualism, and people kind of sleep on Booker T. Washington. But that kind of goes to show that like history really is shaped by, whoever is in these positions of influence, whether you're talking about, historians, archivists, librarians, so on and so forth. And so it just goes to show that it's important for people to kind of do their own research. It's interesting to me that you read Up From Slavery in college. Was that just your own doing, or was that required reading, or what was that?
I want to say it was required by some course, at some point. And it's probably one of the only things that actually stuck with me to this day and was even remotely intriguing, which makes me realize that, I was really bad in high school and I did bad, but it's just if something couldn't catch my attention, I'm on the internet, and that was something that stood the test of time. Yeah, it was required.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, in a nutshell, when you look at the effects of what Booker T. Washington were teaching, they were real. I mean, they had implications not only in the South, but also in the North. He started the Negro Business League, and there was a man who was part of the Negro Business League named Philip Payton Jr. And so he went to Harvard not Harvard. He went to Harlem at a time when Harlem was almost entirely white, and he bought all these buildings there. And there's a lot of black businessmen who moved their families there, and they were able to build Harlem into this kind of black metropolis. And it just so happened to be the place that W.E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP did a lot of their agitation. And so, we say in the film, well, Booker T. Washington and his faction built, W.E.B. Du Bois and his faction destroyed, because if you look at Harlem today, the fact of the matter is that the failure of Harlem has much to do with the implementation of the ideology that W.E.B. Du Bois was pushing. And the same is true in Detroit and Baltimore and all of these other cities where, we've gone your way. We've gone the way of socialism. We put black people in leadership. Like you asked, we, passed all these regulations and did all these things, but the state of these cities today is just abysmal. And so what more do you want at this point,
Right. And it's interesting because it's part, policy, but also really part ideology. And it's when you can brainwash enough people into thinking this way, they're not going to succeed in life or push the standards of living to make a community better. Before we wrap it up, because I'm going to let you go, I know the premiere's tonight, and I'm going to let you say whatever you want for as long. But, I'm learning from history, researching and reading that all these things that I thought were so new, when you listen to most Republican and conservative speakers that I like, that I'm not, I don't hate or anything, but they act like this is so new. I mean, I stood at a conference and watched like 20 speakers. They're like, life is so bad, vote for me. Life is so bad. Oh my God, this just happened, the radical left. But when you really read and relearn history accurately, I start to realize all this stuff isn't new. Like the ACLU, people are like, oh, they just turned on us a couple of years ago. They used to be so great. They were started as socialists. Helen Keller started them. She was a socialist. Helen Keller was a eugenicist. No offense, Helen, but she was into eugenics and, eliminating and killing people that weren't up to par. It's like, sorry, lady, you're not up to, you would be the first one dead with your own ideology. So ACLU didn't turn on you. It's always been that way. The NAACP didn't turn on you. It's always been that way. And this is the same with a lot of these organizations and infrastructure. So in order to really fix it, we have to stop listening to like basic Republicans that are like, oh, this just happened a year ago, and if you vote for me, I'll change it. It's like it happened 100 years ago, and they've kind of implanted, and it's growing. And, in order to solve a problem, you got to understand where it comes from. So that's why it's important to really relearn history and try to, see through all of the narratives that aren't quite accurate.
And that's why your platform is important, because you do take, your followers deeper, and you don't look at just the surface level stuff. Like you actually go in, and that's needed, because the fact of the matter is, like, to the extent that you have Republican politicians, pretending like all this stuff is new, like many of them are ignorant. They just don't know. And they don't really care to know, because many of them are just trying to win an election. But also it's indicative of the fact that, we are a dumbed down generation, and each generation that passes, it seems like we're getting dumber and dumber and dumber, and that's on purpose, which is also what we cover in the film. In Uncle Tom 2, we talk about the education system and why, in the Marxist worldview, you need to dumb down the generations if you're going to ring in this new ideology. And so the number that has done on those of us who are conservative, those of us who do deem it our responsibility to preserve this republic of ours, the number that has done on us is we are kind of using the tools that we've adopted from leftist ideology, and we're just trying to put our own little conservative tinge on it. When in reality, it's like, no, you do have to hit the books. Like, you do have to learn about your history if you're going to be effective. That doesn't mean you need to bore everybody to tears with a history lesson every time you're talking to people, but at least know the basics to the extent to where you can be more effective than otherwise, because you're not willing to go in. You know what I mean? So my hope with the film, with Uncle Tom 2, is that people won't only kind of get their history from a movie, but that they will be inspired to follow up on what we're talking about and do their own research and stop being so timid and weak in a society that, again, the narrative is dominated by people who want to destroy not only this country, but Western civilization in general, and who genuinely want a new world globalist order.
Amen. Appreciate you. I'll definitely have you back. We'll definitely chat soon. Have fun at the premiere. And everybody, once again, uncletom.com is the website, and the code is DREAM, DREAM. I would do capital DREAM. I don't know if lowercase works, but just do capital DREAM. And you could check out the documentary. No joke, I was at the premiere. I watched it, and you could really, obviously when I was watching it, it was great, but the next couple of days it really just kept hitting me, and I was like, wow, there's so much information crammed into those couple hours, where I just definitely inspirational, and definitely challenges not just the left-wing narrative, to be completely honest, but also it really challenges the Republican narrative, because a lot of times Republicans are just chasing the tail, and they're just saying like generic stuff, where I would say Uncle Tom 2 really challenges even their perception of Martin Luther King, civil rights, and stuff like that. That's very important to have a conversation about. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Anomaly.
All right, uncletom.com, code DREAM. Appreciate you guys. God bless, and he'll be back.